So today I'm underneath a Nissan EMV200 electric van, and in this video I'm just going to talk about how you can protect your ABS sensor cables or wheel sensor cables from being chewed by foxes. And this issue isn't particular to the Nissan EMV200 electric van. It affects all vehicles, particularly those people that live in cities where foxes aren't quite so shy as they are in the countryside, and they're more prevalent and are climbing underneath your vehicle. So the reason why I'm under a Nissan EMV200 electric van here is I am protecting the ABS wheel sensor cables on this van, because if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you would have seen that recently I had to go out to a customer's vehicle because they had problems, and it turned out that a fox had chewed through one of the wheel sensor cables on their van. So I'm just coming up with a solution to protect the cables, which I'm doing on this van, and then I'll be replicating it on their van in a few days' time. So this issue can affect all vehicles, and foxes get under the vehicles and they like to chew things. So they could choose your handbrake cables here, but they're much stiffer and tougher. They could chew your copper brake lines, or here where it turns into a rubber hose, they can chew that. But more commonly they chew the electrical cables, and this is your ABS sensor or wheel sensor cable. And I think it happens on these vehicles and others where it's similar, is where you have a bigger loop of free cable. So where the cable is tied to the bodywork and is close to other things, that's not going to be so easy for a fox to get its mouth around those. But where a cable loops, in this case between the back axle and the bodywork, or in this case this loop of wire here, that's easier for a fox to chew there and there, but they're not going to get round the cable when it's mounted next to the subframe or wheel hub or suspension, because there's not enough room for a fox to get its teeth around there. So if you have a vehicle that's got exposed cables or hoses, and you live in a city where you see foxes frequently, then it might be worth protecting them before the damage is caused. So here I have a brand new wheel sensor. That is the actual sensor which goes into the rear of the hub, and then on the other end you've got the electrical connector there. And as you can see, it is only 2-wire, and the actual cable is protected with this thick rubber sheath, and you would have thought that would be good enough. But if a fox decides to chomp on that, they're going to break those inner cores. So that's what I want to protect, and this is a 5mm outer diameter cable. So I just want to add some extra protection to that, just really on that bit where it spans between the rear axle and the bodywork. So there are various products you can buy, but they've got to be split, because you've got to be able to get it over this cable while the cable is in situ on the vehicle, because you're not going to be able to slide it over the wide connector at that end, and you're probably not going to want to take that end out of the hub, but even if you did, it's still very wide, so you're not going to be able to slide anything over either end. So if you look online, you can buy various products. You can buy PVC hose like this, but it's got to have a split in it. If it's a standard bit of hose like this is, that's not going to work. You can buy cable protection product like this. Again, it's got to be the version with a split down the side, because if it's a version like that with no split, you're not going to be able to get that over the connector or the sensor. And I also don't really favour this stuff because it's not particularly flexible, so I haven't gone with that in this case. So I bought two products. The first one is a spiral wrap type product, and this is just plastic. It's not particularly thick, so it's not going to add a great amount of protection, but the key thing is it's very flexible, so it's not going to stop that ABS sensor bending where it wants to. And this version is the 6mm version, so 6mm inner diameter, and because it's a spiral wrap, that will expand to whatever thickness you want it to wrap around, and traditionally use this for joining cables together. but this just adds a bit of extra protection on the outside edge of that ABS sensor. Because I wasn't sure how much protection that would give in its own right, I've got a second product here, which is another cable protection product, but this is the braided type. Again, it's plastic, but this is actually quite good. There's a lot to it. It spirals around on itself quite a bit, so it's at least 2 or 3 layers thick. And this one is the 9mm version. So my intention was to put that around the ABS cable first, and then that around the whole lot. So I've got 2 layers of protection. And I know this is all plastic, but I think this will work quite well. And it's cheap, and it's also very easy to apply, and you can just cut this with scissors. And because all of it is split, or in this case, as you can see, you can lay it out flat and then it folds back on itself. It's all easy to get around an existing cable that's in place. So I'll put links to these products in the video description below, and also other products which I've seen. I've also seen a grey self-adhesive tape which protects cables from rats, and it includes a chemical that rats or mice don't like, which I'm sure is the same for foxes as well. But I think if you were just buying one product, then I think this one is probably going to be good enough in its own right. But anyway, it's cheap stuff, so I think a combination of those two is going to work pretty well. And I've already installed both of them on this wheel sensor cable on this side of the van, and that cable is still nice and flexible, so it's not going to hinder it at all. And I think that is going to work reasonably well. A fox can still bite down on it, of course, but I think that's just going to flex between its teeth before it does any damage to the cable. So I don't think they're going to be chewing on that too long. You could, of course, add other products to it to deter foxes. There are various fox repellent products. I have seen people say you can rub chili peppers on it, or maybe you could coat this with a sort of brush on a grease or something that they might not like. But of course, all those other sort of products are going to eventually wash away with the rainwater. So some sort of physical, permanent protection is really what you need. 90% of the viewers of this channel are not subscribed. I'm sorry to ask, but it would help greatly if you would. Just press the subscribe button. It's free and it shows YouTube you like this sort of vehicle related content. If you want to be notified when new videos are released, please click on the bell button also. Thank you, it really helps more than you would imagine. So this stuff is very easy to apply, and you can just cut it with normal scissors. The braid product, again, because it's plastic, you can just cut it with the scissors. It's very easy to apply. But you'll notice on the ends it does start fraying, and you can use matches or a lighter to melt that to stop it fraying a little bit. But also in the packet they do include heat shrink, where you can melt heat shrink at the ends, but you're not going to get that stuff over the ABS sensor connector at one end or the actual sensor. So you're not going to be able to apply that when a sensor is in situ on the vehicle. So I think cut it to length, melt the ends with a match or a lighter, and then that will just stop it fraying over time, and you can then just easily apply this. I think that will work quite well. So let's protect this cable. So first off, I'll use the spiral wrap, and you want to cut this much longer than the cable, because when I did the other side, when I wrapped it around, I actually ended up using a lot more. So you basically just got to wind this on. It's a bit time consuming, and I haven't started at the top, because once it's on you can slide it up. So you just got to keep winding this around the cable. This does take quite a while to put on, but I think even though this is quite thin plastic, I'm sure it adds some benefit, some protection, and it's cheap, and it will be quite easy to do these other cables which are close to the bodywork if you want. But you don't have to make a great job of it. You can leave gaps, you can push it up tight, but at least that is still going to be flexible and it's not going to push the cable into a position that it naturally doesn't want to be in. And then when you get near the end, you can cut that roughly where you think it's got to be cut. Again, you don't have to be precise with this. It can be a bit short, you can leave a bit overhanging. It really doesn't matter. I'm just going to cut that a bit shorter. And that got all the cable covered. When it comes to the braided stuff, you can cut this to length with a pair of scissors. You could use a match to melt the ends to stop them throwing a little bit. And this is really easy to put on. Just open up the split and push it around your cable, slide that up, and that should be a doddle to fit. And then when you've got it on, it's worth running your finger or your thumb inside to make sure that is properly wrapping around itself, because it doesn't initially unless you do that. So make sure that is probably wrapping around itself so it's effectively doubling up. There, that's on. I think that's going to work pretty well. And if you wanted, you could put some tape around the end, but to be honest, it's not really needed when it's underneath the vehicle. It doesn't have to look good. It's just got to stay in place, and that's going to stay in place just fine. And then you could put a bit more on that bit of cable that's exposed there. You could do your handbrake lines, or you could do your brake cables. It's really up to you. But to be honest, I don't think these bits are going to get bitten. It's the cables that hang down low, which aren't close to the bodywork like the rest. So I think in this case, just covering those two wheel sensor cables there is sufficient. It's cheap to do, the parts are cheap, it's relatively quick, and you can do this without jacking the vehicle up. You've obviously got to get under the vehicle, but if you get one side up on a curb, that's usually enough to crawl underneath and do one side, maybe both, but at worst then get the other side up on a curb, and that gives you enough room to wriggle underneath to do that job. And on the Nissan EMV200 here, you could do this part of the cable, but I don't think this is too vulnerable because it's tied down to the cross member here, so there isn't really room for Fox to get these. So this is the new ABS sensor which is going on the customer's van, which you may have seen in that previous video, and before this is fitted to their van, I'm going to protect that same loop on this one as well. And I'll be protecting this part of the cable on all Nissan vans I sell now, just because it's easy to do while it's here. And now I've experienced a case myself where I've seen a sensor cable damaged by a Fox, then I'll be doing this to all vans I sell. So, do you think that's going to provide enough protection? Well, I think it will. But of course, if a Fox really wants to continue chewing on that, they are still going to get through. This is only plastic at the end of the day. But I think that's going to provide enough protection that a Fox will maybe bite it and then move on. What do you think? If you want to protect it more, then you're going to have sort of a steel braided protection product, or a steel flexible conduit tube you can get for protecting cables, but you're never going to be able to get it on there because they're not split, and you're not going to be able to get it over that electrical connector or the sensor on the other end. So you're a bit limited on what you can do with these. I have heard that people have put tie wraps around and then cut the tie wrap so you get a sharp point, as you do with tie wraps. So you could also do that as well. On top of this, you could put some tie wraps along there with some sharp points, and that might deter them as well. But if you've got any other ideas, let me know in the comments below. So that'll do for this one. If you found it useful, as always, please do click the thumbs up because that really does help. Do subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.